Hi again, Mark here from Talkingbass. This week I'm sitting down to talk bass with the fantastic Ariane Cap. Ariane is author of the best-selling book Music Theory for the Bass Player and is a very prominent figure in online music education from both her own website and the SBL Academy. She's also very active as a gigging bass player in her adopted home of California. As well as conventional bass duties, Ariane also performs in more experimental settings as both a soloist and as solo accompaniment within various duos. So sit back and relax while we sit and talk bass with the wonderful Ariane Cap. Hi Ariane, how you doing?
Hey, Mark, I'm doing great.
So, you are the premier authority on music theory for bass. You've got your great book out and everything, and it's going good guns.
Yeah, the book has been a quite amazing adventure. So it's actually just the first of several shenanigans that I have planned. But as you well know, all these things take a long time and lots of thought and putting it together. So
How long is it now since that you released the book?
I published that in 2015. I started writing it in
Really?
2012. So it was a long thought out, and I originally wanted to write a completely different book, and this was going to be like the intro. So
Wow, that's gone quick. So 2015, it only seems like yesterday that you released that.
yeah, and we have gone through several revisions, and keep updating it. Then we added the videos in 2016. They're like free videos that go with the book. And then we added a course, put that online, and now we're doing smaller courses of that. But it's like music theory for the bass player. I think is an important foundation, but it's not all there is. So I'm working on a reading book, on a timing book, a groove, and on fretboard harmony. That's really going to be the next one. So
Yeah.
it's a whole package. It's not just theory, but that book happened to be the first one. So
And that's all run from the website.
yeah,
All the
it's
courses.
on my blog.
Yeah.
I have this weird online presence where I'm really a blog, because I just started blogging and writing about music topics. And then I started running my courses from there, and, running my teaching from there. And so it just kind of all evolved. So
It's Ari's bass blog, isn't it?
that's right. Yeah,
Yeah.
ourspaceblog.com.
Yeah. Yeah. So for people that don't know, so what's the main stuff that you cover in the music theory for bass?
Well, my observation was that I had so many students come into my teaching studio who would know a bunch of songs, but they didn't know the names for things, So they would be playing pentatonics and mixolydian scales and Lydian scales and all that stuff, but they didn't have names for it, and they were a little bit apprehensive about music theory. And what I observed is that oftentimes in the past, when somebody wanted to teach them music theory, what they would do is like, forget everything you know, let's this book, and there are lines and clefs, and then most music theory books, they start on page 1. You have this a whole note, this a half note, this a quarter note, you got that thing, and then the next page you have this is a treble clef, which is great for bass players, right? and here's a bass clef, and this is how note works, and on page 5 and 6 there's all arpeggios, and all scales. And I just observed that could be a real off-turner for people,
Yeah.
Because a lot of people are intuitive players, and they can hear and they can listen, and they might be really proficient, but they couldn't understand what all these dots on lines would help them create grooves, and how would that help. So I sort of saw an opportunity to use the bass fretboard as a jumping board to teach. And I would go, okay, this thing that you would know from, what is it, Wild Cherry, Play That Funky Music, right? That's a minor pentatonic. And you can finger it like this and like this and like this. And, and just build it from there, because then it gives some context. And what I also really like is I start with teaching shapes, and I start with the smallest shape, which is intervals, right? And then I build it from there. Then we make chords and scales and all of that. But I mean, if you have just an octave or you have a fifth, you can build a groove, right? I mean, so many grooves are built on fifths, so octaves, So it's like you can immediately do something with the material. And that's what we do in the course. We take all these shapes and then we create all sorts of improvisations with it and create all sorts of rules. You have to be on this part of the bass, or you have to use only a certain string as a starting point and whatnot, just so to get people grooving and using the material. And that's been working really, really well for people.
Yeah, because a lot of, I think a lot of people don't actually realize with things like intervals, intervals being the building blocks of music, they sometimes, if you try explaining to somebody about like what even a major third or a minor sixth or whatever, augmented fifths, whatever, they always, especially beginner bass players, they kind of sometimes turn off to it because they think, oh no, all this, this lingo. But yet if you say an octave, they always know what an octave is, but they don't realize that's an interval. And we're only talking about the same thing, but just...
No, exactly right. And there are only 12 of them, and then you can go bigger than the octave, but then you kind of already know it. And they're inversions of intervals. So really all you need to know is half of them, if you know half of them, you understand the sound and how you finger it, and there's fingerings that go with it, and so exactly right. And the other thing I think why this book was such a success is because I wanted to connect the dots between theory and technique, because if you learn a shape on the fretboard, you might as well do that with good fingering. And if we're talking about good fingering, we might also talk about why we do the fingering the way we do it, and how to not kill yourself while you creating. So I have a big chapter and big emphasis on technique in the book, and that's also I've been getting a lot of feedback that's been helpful for people.
Oh, that's good. So it's always worth people knowing that it's not just theory, that you're covering. It's bass playing in general.
Well, I mean, it's important for me to just give people a tool that they can then use, and if you do some, like you learn the fifth, then, this is especially what we do in the course then, just use it in a fill, use it in a groove, here's a backing track. Now let's just use fifths, we can play them up, we can play them down, that sort of idea that really then ingrains it and keeps it away from this. I always think that people have a little bit of a apprehension to things like names, or it's like fifths. It's a concept. You want to do something, but if you can do something, you can feel it, you can hear it, you can see a fretboard diagram, then it's much more an easy entry, and especially I see that with the modes. My theory is that a lot of people are really scared of the modes just because of the names.
Yeah.
Lydia, Lydia, it's just weird. So, but I come up with some simple rules, and I like simple. I just really like simple. It's like I'll tell you what I do with the modes. Like there are 3 major modes, 3 minor modes, and 1 weird one, right?
That's how I think. Like locker room being the weird one.
Exactly. And then I go, okay, the 3 major ones, there's one that sounds major, like it, so we're already 1 down, right? And there's major that sounds weird on the bottom, that's Lydian. And then there's major that sounds weird on top, it's not really weird is a bad word, but not what you would be used to, right? That's Mixolydian, so you just learn what the aberration is. You start them all from the same root. Then you can do the same thing with minor, right?
Yeah.
One is Aeolian, and then you got Phrygian, which is odd on the bottom, and or the Spanish one, and then you got Dorian, which is odd on the top, which is the Irish one, and so it's like I like to simplify things because there's no reason why we should be turned off by some fancy names or something.
Well, I think that's what people need as well, because you need some kind of familiarity. If you've got your basic major scale, it's like the thing that everybody knows, and it's the familiar thing. Relating it back, making those connections is key probably to, because it becomes more stepwise then, like a step by step anyway. You think, okay, you got your basic seed, and then like knowing that Lydian has just got that sharpened fourth, or
exactly,
just these slight variations,
right? Exactly.
Rather than thinking, oh, now I've got to learn what's this Lydian thing all about. And it's just the same as the major scale. But
just change 1 note, and there you go.
Yeah. But I think people get just really, people get so confused by modes. You start talking to people about things like modes, and they just, it's almost like they turn off before they've even started, because they think it's just going to be something like really complex, and they don't realize it's so simple.
Yes.
If you explain it in the right way.
No, I completely agree. And it's really nothing to be afraid of. And I think it makes it relatable than when, you know, I put on then a background track and I put on a track with sharp 11 and then we improvise with Lydian, you know, and you do that all over the bass and you start really hearing the sound of Lydian and enjoying it. You know, you can take it places and make it your own, and you know, so improvising with the stuff, I think, then helps to make
Well, I think having, you know, like you thought that saying it was weird might be the wrong way of putting it, but I think you're right. I think as long as you've got some kind of you know, like people often say that the way to memorize is by using humor or, you know, anything crazy to try and remember something. The more weird, the better. So actually seeing things in those ways, I think it actually does help with getting it in there. If you're trying to think of everything as being too normal and just a list, nobody wants to just learn a list. You'll always forget a list. It's like learning a telephone number.
Totally true. Yeah, totally.
Yeah. You know, give it a smell.
Exactly.
Make it weird.
Yeah, no, I completely agree. And I think goofy names and goofy mnemonics and, you know, like I give shapes funny names just to how they help stick, you know, like pentatonic is like major is little box, big box with the root and the A string, and minor is big box, little box with the root on the A string, you know.
Yeah.
That's shapes that you can relate to and use right away. So
I think some people can get too caught up in doing things too traditional sometimes with learning. Like, you know, here's the list of things, you know, as if you just read them out of a traditional harmony book. And the way that a lot of people learn is by seeing things by seeing patterns. And there's always this thing about patterns being wrong. You'll hear people argue this point that no, don't learn patterns. And the way that humans operate is seeing patterns in things. You know, that's why we see faces in clouds and things like that. Yeah. We're calibrated to seeing patterns, aren't we? And as much as, you know, because I've been in trouble before. I remember I used to, when I used to teach at my own music college, the head of music would always be pulling me up because I do like things like you know, explaining things in a less than traditional sense, you know, just using these crazy, but it's any way that'll get it in there, isn't it?
Yeah, I not completely agree. And I think, you don't want to just give them like the funny shapes and leave it at that. I mean, it's important to understand what it is, how it relates, how it sounds, how it connects to the root, you know, how you can use it and all that good stuff. It doesn't necessarily just stop there, but I think it's a great entryway. And a lot of universities or I guess programs, they come from a classical traditional background, as do I. You know, I learned classical when I was very, very young. And so to me, all these teachings were very familiar, but they were pretty torturous back then. You know, you had to analyze a whole lot of stuff. You were never allowed to make it your own, you know, and you had to like learn all these rules. You know, it was like overbearing, you know, so what am I left with, you know, trying to we had to build fugues in university and stuff like that. And, you know, all of that was interesting, but it was a really brainy exercise, it felt like, you know. So my goal was always to sort of, as you say, make it practical, and if a shape or a pattern or like a goofy name is the entryway, then by God, go for it, you know.
Especially for beginner bass players who really want to be just playing a groove basically, but they want to learn a little bit more about it. So how far do you go in the book? How far does it take you?
Well, my you mean just like in terms of what I cover? I just wanted to give people just the most important basics, so I don't go into, you know, I do, let's see, I do intervals, I do scales, major and minor, also harmonic and melodic minor. I do the modes. I don't do the modes of melodic minor and harmonic minor because I do consider that as a slight bit advanced. So, you know, those would be in a volume 2 or whatnot. But I do tell them about sus chords, about alterations, extensions. You know, I was just sort of thinking, if you are a bass player who wants to open up a real book and understand what's happening and what you can do with it and what your function is as a bass player in that context, that was sort of my goal, you know. So I'm not going into fancy scales. I do, however, talk about symmetric scales. because I think they are extremely educational, you know. So when I talk about all these intervals, I have everybody repeat the interval over and over and over, because that teaches you a whole bunch about the fretboard. You know, if you do a chromatic scale, or if you do a whole tone scale, you know, even though that's definitely an advanced scale, if you will, but it's super useful in understanding how the fretboard layout works.
Yeah.
And then I do that with minor thirds. We just stack minor thirds, you know, so there's a lot of stuff where that's applicable. And it's also helpful understanding the fretboard. And then you learn a good fingering with it and so forth. So I do that with every single interval. And I think that's, you know, ends up being some more advanced, you know, subject matter. But my intent was mainly to bring it in because it helps understand the fretboard.
That's brilliant. Yeah.
Beautiful symmetry. It just makes pretty shapes, you know.
Yeah.
It's so fascinating. It's like you can see all these beautiful, you know, repetitions on it and such. So
yeah, that's great. So I'd say that it's any beginner would be able to jump straight in.
So here's the thing: I'm starting at absolute zero. But even though I have some exercises on, I think it's page 5 or 6, that stump people that are already super advanced. Like I do these exercises about how notes work. So I literally start from zero. It's like, you know, how do notes relate? What are the 12 notes? Where are the half steps? All of that. But then I have these exercises where you have to set a metronome, and then you have to say, for example, half steps going up, always saying sharps or something, you know, or then we do whole steps or just the letter names. And if you do that with a metronome, that can be pretty hard, even for experienced players. You know, if like, let's say it's whole steps and I go C, D, E, F sharp, A flat, B flat, C, and then you skip 1 or skip 2, and then we do it backwards. I mean, you can come up with stuff that's pretty like, whoa. Yeah. And I find it useful though, because it does help us if we know how notes relate to each other. That's useful. You know, you've got a chord change coming at you and then another one right next to it. If you know how to jump, it's useful. Yeah. So I do start from zero, but it's not a how to play bass book. It's a reference manual, and so it typically attracts players who have been playing for a while and just really want to know. Now, you know, it's like, okay, I can pick up things off of a tab, or I can go to YouTube and learn a song, but it's just not cutting it anymore. I want to be doing my own grooves. I want to understand what it means. I want to read a chord chart. That's sort of the main clientele. But I've had complete beginners who've delved into it and told me that they did fine, you know. And I've also had quite experienced players that said, I never really looked at it this way. This is kind of interesting.
Did you play bass from the start, or did you play another instrument you get started on?
I come completely from the classical end of things. And, you know, it was a bit funny because my grandfather was a conductor, and my mom was a beautiful piano player. My brother was a piano player. He's 6 years older. And, you know, I'd always go to the piano and pick some notes of stuff he had just played, because I had just really good ears, you know. And then when I finally was old enough to get into conservatory, and I was so ready, and they didn't let me in. They let me in with 6, even though I had to be 7 in theory. I mean, if I look back at this, it was so dumb, because I was really ready. You know, I've taught a long time. I taught kids for a while, and I, you know, it's like you can tell some are ready really early. You know, and I wanted to learn, and now I just consider it lost time looking back, you know. But yeah, it was all about classical stuff. And
did you start on piano?
I did, yeah. I mean, I think they put me in some sort of org thing before that, but I remember very distinctly playing piano and doing all these recitals, and, you know, it felt more like a goody two-shoes thing, and you're not supposed to listen. I mean, you know, when my brother was playing some stuff and I would go and pick it out, they forbid me to play those pieces because I was supposed to learn to read. Yeah, I mean, that's in my book, completely the wrong way. I mean, you know, it's like, hey, there's somebody's got good ears. Let's, you know, foster that.
Yeah.
But no, it was all about reading. So that was a bit unfortunate. I also remember the first year of piano, I was like learning this book where everything sounded just hideous, you know? And I had to wear this thing where you couldn't see the keys. Do you know what I mean?
Right.
There was this paper thing you had to put over your head, and then you had to read the notes. You were sitting like this, and you couldn't see, you know? Oh, it sounded so awful that you couldn't tell if you made a mistake, you know? So that was my entryway. And then I stuck with that for a pretty long time. And then when I was done with high school, and during that whole time, it was all classical. And it was even a little bit like music with drums in them was a bit frowned upon, you know? So that wasn't real music. And when I was 18, I just needed to get away and see the world. And I ended up in the States, and I was an au pair girl, and I was hanging out on Harvard Square with the musicians, you know? And it was amazing because everybody had guitars, and, you know, and I would just pick one up, and because I knew theory and because I had pretty good technique on the piano, I could just do stuff.
Yeah.
And I was like, that's interesting, you know? And so that's when I started, you know, getting into the Beatles and everything else that I had missed before, you know? And so I then took a detour into studying biology. I have a master's of science, but then it became pretty clear that I was really drawn to music. And when they gave me my master's, I turned right back around. I was like, where's the music department?
Yeah.
And then that was the beginning of a long, really cool journey. So.
And did you go straight into electric bass?
No, I was when I started playing in bands, I was a guitar player, keyboard player, singer. You know, I did all the different things that were needed. And then one of our bands lost our bass player, and we had gigs on the books and couldn't find anybody. I guess we were pretty bad or something. But it was very hard to find somebody. And then somebody said, why don't you get a bass? You play guitar anyway. And so I did. And then a couple of weeks later, I played my first gig. And I was just like, I'm liking this. You know?
Yeah.
It just came very naturally and very easy. And,
it's amazing, you know, how many people I know, musicians that have become, that have taken up the instrument that their first instrument because of somebody getting fired from a band or somebody getting ill in a band. You know, like so many people just end up taking up an instrument. A friend of mine, he's that I've played with lots and lots, a pianist, and he's a great pianist, you know. Yeah. But he was a saxophonist, like a professional saxophonist, like a really, you know, great jazz saxophonist for years and years and years, professional. And then he was on a ship gig, and one of the pianists got fired, and so he took over on keys, and he wasn't a pianist, but he took over on keys. And ever since, because he got more gigs as a pianist than he did as a saxophonist, he's just stayed on keys. But God, I mean, I can't even imagine doing that and actually just saying, "Oh, I'll take the piano," you know. But he can read. I mean, even though it's transposed, I mean, I don't know, but I mean, he could play. So, and then he did that, and there's so many people that do that, and you're one of them.
Well, you know, it just kind of happened. Did you start on bass?
I played keys. Well, I played organ as a little kid.
With the pedals?
Which actually, my brother carried it on. I stopped after a few years, but it was funny how that actually had an effect on my bass playing later on, I think, because I already knew how to play. I knew what bass was because of it, and I kind of knew, you know, I knew bass, clef and treble clef. And, you know, it's weird how that, because I've always thought, organ, what's that got to do with electric bass? But it's funny how it actually did have an effect. So you took up electric bass, and so you were already in America then when you started doing that?
No, I wasn't. I was actually still in Austria. And
right, okay.
There was a private school in Munich I went to that was kind of like a little bit like an MIT, Lama kind of situation. So I went to that for a while. And then there are two universities in Austria that I applied to. And one was Linz and one was Vienna. And I got into both of them, but then I decided for Vienna just because of the living situation. And they had, after I think 2 or 3 years there, and it was a bit of a hybrid program because they are big on classical over there, obviously, so I had a lot of classical classes, and there was a fairly new jazz department, which led a little bit of an underground almost existence,
Right.
They had in all the classical teaching rooms, you had beautiful, you could choose. I remember in my piano lesson, I could choose between a Bösendorfer and a Steinway, they were
wow.
both in that room. And then I'd go to some jazz class or something, and it was in the basement, and we had all these out of tune uprights, So it showed you a little bit what the emphasis was. But they had a program of an exchange, a classical person comes to Vienna and a jazzer goes to the University of Miami.
Right.
I applied and I got it. And that was the beginning of something really exciting. So I went down there, and I was there for a year and absolutely loved it. And it was coming out of that whole classical world, just going into this place where there's such a rich tradition of jazz and all these jazz bands and high school bands and all of that. I was just in heaven, to be amongst such a rich tradition.
That must have been quite intimidating going over there, from what you'd been doing, going, straight in there.
In a way it was also because still at that time I hadn't been playing bass that long.
Yeah, that's right. Yeah.
Late. So, but what was always just saving me were these things that, exactly the stuff I'm talking about in my book. I had really good technique. And I had really good fretboard knowledge from the Munich school, and I had really good theory. Yeah. So we were doing. I remember I tested out of a bunch of classes, and it was I was amazed because I was nervous as heck because it's UM, and so I tested out of a bunch of classes, and then I had melodic minor, I had modal, I did a bunch of arranging classes, I did. Modal harmony with Ronnie Miller, which was a hugely influential class on me in understanding how music's put together and what modal music really is versus functional music and so forth. And I did really well. I was thriving. I also did nothing else but practice. My friends were like, "So how's Coconut Grove?" And I'm like, "I don't know." I'm practicing.
Yeah.
So, and I learned big band arrangement, and I learned, also, we had these really cool classes. They were called rhythm section playing, groove class or something like that. And it was basically for the rhythm section only. And how do you comp for a soloist?
Yeah.
And that was pretty brilliant. It was all about, how to use your range to be complementary to the soloist and all these things that I had never heard anything about, talking about phrasing and dynamics and interplay and call and response. And the teacher was super strict. He came in first day and he said, he looked in the round and it was like, there's 3 things I can't stand. He said, women playing jazz, that wouldn't fly anymore these days, right?
No.
Women playing jazz, Europeans playing jazz because they don't swing. And I'm like, oh God. And then he was like, electric bass players.
No.
All 3 of them, right? But I have to tell you, the first thing I did is I switched to the upright for that class. And I just worked my backside off. And he noticed it, and he gave me an A, which was something he never did, So I was terrified of the guy though, and I wish he wouldn't said the things he said, but he, I learned a boatload from the guy.
How do you find it in that sense? Being a woman in, because I noticed on the website it was the, what is it? It's the camp for women and girls thing that you do. Yes, yeah. And do you find that it is noticeable, the sort of male-female divide with it? Or is it, how do you find that?
Well, I have to say my experiences, with some very few exceptions, have been nothing but positive. I have always had super nice bandmates, and I always wanted to be part of the band, so I would be extra, trying to not be girly or whatever, in the band.
One of the lads kind of thing.
Yeah, exactly. I always wanted to be one of the guys, but I have to say all the bands that I've been at, I've just made such great experiences. There were a few few funny things that I experienced, like, what that teacher said, or what, for example, once I didn't get an audition because I called up and there was a female voice and he was like, no, we need a real bass player,
No.
And had some sound guys be a little weird, when they saw me walking in and that sort of thing. But I have to say, overwhelmingly, it's been just a positive experience.
Yeah.
And people trust you when you deliver and when you clearly come in prepared and you respect everybody and you're a professional, and that, really at the end of the day is what counts. Now, on the teaching end, I have to say I've been very grateful to be involved with the women's and girls camps that you've mentioned. And I've been very active in the Bay Area, specifically when I used to live there, with girls camps, women's camps. And I realized that, a lot of girls would, in their jazz bands, they would end up being one of 2 or 3 girls, and the boys would close the band room to them, or they would feel awkward, or they would make some bad experiences and then they would quit. And while that's not always the experience, but it is a frequent one. And so when I heard about these women who were putting together, Ellen Seeling and Jean Feinberg, who were putting together these camps just for girls initially, and then they took off and became so successful that then the moms and the aunts were like, I want to do this. So they would make the whole same thing for women. But that it was a really, it's a really important opportunity for girls to just be amongst themselves, have an all-female faculty, and to be, it's so, improvisation is an intimidating thing, right? When you first start out, and it exposes you in a certain way. And while people are different, I don't want to say the cliche that guys have it easier and girls are more self-conscious. I don't know, maybe with cliches, there is a kernel of truth in it. But there were a lot of girls who were just really terrified to solo and didn't know how to expose themselves and show themselves and such. And to just see all the other girls be so supportive and say, you can do this and just try it. And they would have all this great advice. Like, I'll never forget that one of the girls said, it's just play the melody, but swap the note order around. That's great advice. She's like, play every part, but play it backwards, and then sound like you're improvising. And but they would just, help each other and to create an environment where it's all about being girly and you can be yourself and amongst other girls was just really important for them. And then we had the older ones turned to mentors to the younger ones. This camp has been running for a long time. And then there's a second one that sprung up as a result of it. And so that's been just a beautiful experience. And I've been just really happy to be involved with it. It's always just a hoot, We have these lunch sessions where they can go out and improvise and it's just fun. And if you would turn up as a girl, and that has happened to me, I would show up at some workshop and I'd be the only girl, that maybe was a singer, and that was typically it. So especially when I used to do a lot of bass camps when I was back in Austria, and just anything that I could get there was a jazz thing that I always went to, but I typically was the only girl there. And if you are of the constitution that bothers you, then I can see somebody quitting because of that. And that's just really sad. So if you offer a camp that's particularly to girls, it's not about shutting anybody out. It's not saying anybody's evil or those bad men, we shouldn't, it's none of that. It's just, we just want to be amongst ourselves and do jazz. That's it, And that was very successful and really fun to be part of. So.
That's brilliant. Because I'd never heard of that until I saw it on your blog, and I mean, it makes sense. I think a lot of it would, like you say, be more awkwardness at just because of the sheer number of male bass players. Everybody feels insecure when it doesn't matter whether you're male, female, whatever. You go into a new situation in like a band, it's bad enough when you've just got to go into there and nobody knows who you are and you've got to try and prove yourself, and the gig and all that kind of thing.
And one thing that was really a striking statistic that I read, in classical orchestras, they used to have almost exclusively male people in the orchestra and male instrumentalists. And I believe it was sometime in the 70s where they started doing blind auditions.
Right.
And that up almost up the female component up to 40% or something like that. I'm not sure about the numbers, but it was significant.
Yeah.
So this idea that there is it's really just the music that counts, and to just listen, that was an important one. And so it's, and at the same time, I also want to say it's really dangerous to use the girl argument to hold yourself back, because it's easy to say, oh, it's because I'm a girl, or because there's prejudice, or because, maybe it is. I'm not saying it doesn't exist. It certainly does. But if you work hard, if you really want to do this, then it really, at the end of the day, I would hope, I'm optimistic, and would say it matters that you prove yourself and that you do a good job.
Well, I think as well, there's a lot of great female role models in the bass.
Well, now there is.
Yeah,
now
like you've got Esperanza and all that.
Yeah, oh my God, Taylor Esperanza, Carol Kay. I mean, the Yolanda Charles. I mean, there's so many amazing players. So I think it's less of an issue now. But if you look back, like maybe even 20 or 30 years ago, there's so many amazing female jazzers, especially female trumpet players and sax players and pianists and such. And they, for some of them, really had it hard because they were women, So hopefully we've made some progress there. I was just really heartened by some of the stories the girls would tell us, in the camp, and that's where I see that there is really a market and a reason to do these all-girl camps, because otherwise, why would that be? Girls are not going to sound any different, So, but there is just this safe, environment where they're all girls. So we're taking that factor out of the whole equation, and that can be, helpful and just a good place.
You also do the Victor Wooten, the Wooten Woods thing, don't you, as well? Because I'd love to go over to that. How is that?
I love it.
Yeah.
Yeah, I'm a camper. I'm a total camper. So I'll tell you how I see it. And I haven't been in many years, unfortunately, just because I have no time. I'd love to go. But I've been to some of the early camps that were even at the old campgrounds. And since then, Victor has built and created his own place. And I was there to help build one year, actually. But what's so cool about, especially the Base Nature Camp, and to everybody listening, I think that's the one you wanna start with. It's just an amazing experience he takes you through, from being really grounded in nature, because part of the day you do things like tracking and making fire and building a shelter and, doing like finding food in the wild, which all are useful skills. I mean, if I ever get stranded, I know what to do. And that's because of camp. And, you do lots of awareness exercises in nature, and it's in a beautiful campground and everybody's super chill. The food is incredible. There's this cook who just, knocks it out of the park. And amidst all of that, you do some bass playing, and you map across the things you learn in nature, like awareness and interplay and, how things relate to each other and how you relate to it. You just fit that seamlessly into the world of playing music together. So it's all about communicating, and it's all about, a playful approach and an experience of awareness. And he does that really masterfully, so he like his approach about Victor and his whole team, his approach to, the fear of mistakes or of wrong notes, and, his whole approach of music is like a language. And he, so there's a lot of wonderful stuff in there that I've really enjoyed. I don't agree with all details, or I would, I've with some, like music theory, I teach differently, I view differently, technique I view differently, but I think what Victor has is very unique, beautiful, powerful, and helps you lose the fear of mistakes, and helps you find your own voice. And Victor and his whole family, like all these beautiful, amazing kids that are there, and his friends, and then all these people always show up. You don't know who's going to be there. Like Marcus Miller might walk in, or Stanley Clark might walk in. It's just amazing. So
This is
he
like bass heaven.
Oh, it's
That's
wonderful.
awesome.
And don't be fooled though. I mean, don't be fooled is the wrong way to say it, but don't think that you won't have going to meet some demons. I know that was certainly my experience because, I come out of this classical and, you're supposed to color inside the lines. And there was a sense of lost time when you just hear Victor talk how he learned amidst his 5 brothers and 4 brothers, and how he would just they would just play day and night, and it was this playful approach, and Reggie, the oldest brother, would show all the younger ones what to do and how to do it, and this fun element about it. I'm not going to say it wasn't hard work. It certainly was. And he did tell about, sometimes he would cry because his fingers were hurting, and they had gigs. I mean, they were opening for Maynard Ferguson, when they were all really little. So it's not like it was all just fun and games. It certainly wasn't, but it was a very different approach in terms of community and making music. When I started learning music, I felt it very lonely. It was better you kept it under wraps, that you had piano lessons,
Yeah.
You were like, that was the geeky thing to do. You didn't want to talk about that, So, and all these recitals that were just pure torture, compare that with the family just getting together and jamming, and everybody open up the garage door and everybody stops, so it's just a totally different way of music making. And so I certainly met some of my demons, like sense of lost time and lost opportunity. And I'll be the first to say I can be incredibly nervous playing, and, self-conscious, and beat myself up over mistakes. And it seemed like they were bypassing all of that in a way, so it was incredibly freeing. But I also met, some of my own, dark spots around making music, that's for sure. But I highly recommend it. It's Woods, I think, .com, or Victor Wooten Camps. If you Google that, you'll find it.
And I guess Victor's pretty hands-on with it. He's, he gets stuck in there with it all.
He is there from the first moment in the morning, where they do yoga classes and stretching and meditation and all sorts of things. He has all these wonderful guests that come from all over the place, and he will be there from the first moment and the last one to leave. He'll be there. If there's a jam somewhere, he'll be sitting in, and it's just amazing. It's a really fun experience.
How long does it last?
And the Bass Nature Camp, I think, is like a bit longer than a week, or maybe a week, something like that. And he has shorter ones too. There was one I once went to that was called Spirit Camp, where he's exploring, awareness beyond let's say the tangible and physical world, and music. And there's Theory Camp he does. I'd love to check that one out. And he's always got something new. I remember once he had a guest, a woman who was playing for the dying. So she was a harpist, and she was, telling what she does for a living is she goes to hospitals and she plays for the dying, and that was just mind blowing. What she was talking about her experiences. And then another time he had a man as a guest who completely lived off grid. He was just completely sustainable and like built his own like abode in the wild and such. I mean, just really interesting encounters that you would, that's hard to wrap your mind around, how because it's so outside of our experience.
I keep thinking I should sign up for one of those.
You gotta go.
I know. I might go this next year. Are you going to be going? When's the next nature one?
It's usually in summer because of where he is. It's in Nashville. They have lots of rain, and so there's only a certain window that they can do it. But it's usually summer, and he usually has he also has kids camps now, and he has all sorts of different ones. Yeah, let me know when you're going. Maybe we can.
Oh yeah, I'll definitely. Yeah, that'd be amazing. Yeah. Just going back to when you went over, so you moved over to California. So what's the main gig that you've got over there? Are you just doing mostly, is it more teaching, or have you got any kind of big gigs that you're doing over there?
Yeah, well, I mean, it's hard for me to, keep all the plates juggling in the air because I really do a lot of things. I have several of my own bands. My main project is a duo with Paul Hansen. Paul is a bassoonist, an electric bassoonist. He played with the Flecktones. He's currently on tour.
It's amazing. I love his playing.
Yeah, no, he's an incredible musician, and I'm just happy to lay it down for him and hang on. He's
And that's a duo. That's just a duo that you do with him.
It's so fun because we both get to do. Paul uses all these pedals, and I have that's way too big, and we just try to figure out using harmonizers, using chords. I do a lot of tapping. I use the 6-string on that project exclusively, otherwise I don't, but on that project it's all 6-string, and it's all about tapping and being the melody, and at times and being both ends, and using technology. And even though we're just two, we sound pretty big.
Yeah.
And especially Paul with all his effects, and just the bassoon is such a guttural instrument.
Well, he uses wah-wah on it, doesn't he? And he gets that funky sound. I couldn't believe it the first time I heard it.
Envelope filter, and he's like funky. And, his influences are like Jimi Hendrix.
Yeah.
So he's like putting on distortion and everything. And so it's just an absolute blast. It's a huge challenge. It's a lesson every single time I play with him. It's amazing. And so he's turned me on to playing with delay pedals and using several different types of delays. And it's just an absolute hoot. So that's our duo, and we're called Un, because bassoon minus bass, you're left with Un. And then I play in a Latin disco band, Generation Esmeralda. I play in a couple of jazz outfits. I play with Girls Got the Blues, which is a Bay Area outfit with amazing female musicians, Lara Price, Janice Maxie Reed, Robin Ross. So that's a great band to be part of. And then I freelance and I do recording projects. So I used to be in the kids music scene in a while. So for a while, and I just recorded it was almost a year ago now, but for Disney we did some tracks and such. So I'm active as a performer. I don't do like my Napa. I used to have a top 40 band in Napa where I did a ton of weddings and corporate events and that sort of thing. I don't do that anymore. I'm happy to just do the gigs that feed my soul, and I'm very involved in the solo bass world. So I'm now putting on together with Josh Cohen, we're putting on solo bass night 6 and 7. There used to be solo bass night 1 through 5, were a Bay Area tradition with typically Michael Mannering and cats like that.
Yeah.
So we are now carrying that forward. So we are having Stu Ham, Michael Mannering, Kai Eckhart, Norm Stockton, and several others perform at 2 different shows in California. One is in San Francisco Bay Area, and the other one is in LA, and that's November 7th and 14th, I believe. The website is solobassnight.com, and me and Josh have been setting all this up and are now really trying to get this going, and we're looking to tour it. So I hope you guys get ready over there, because we want to go over to the UK and catch you and Lawson and cats. So it's just a passion. And then there's the teaching side of me, which I love. I absolutely am a dedicated teacher. I love what I do. It's I'm sure, just like how much work that is, with a lot of platform and to publish courses and put it all up and keep it running. And so that's a big part of what I do. And, you know, private one-on-ones, which I mostly do to sort of test my materials and just keep in touch with students, because I want to make sure that what I create is applicable, and I want to stay in close contact to learners. And so I do that, and, you know, that's I don't sleep enough. There's that.
I always found the private tuition was really good for that. You know how you say testing out your material? Like a lot of my, especially the early stuff that I used to do on YouTube, which I hate now and I look back on it, but like a lot of that stuff came from one-on-one tuition. You know, I'd be doing like a lesson and it's like, oh, that, you know, when you get one of those light bulb moments in a student and it's like, when you see it, you think, great, now I can go and put that out there. And, you know, and so that was always where I kind of, where I got a lot of the resources from for doing stuff back then.
I always feel like I learn more from my students in a lesson than the other way around, you know, because if you've got somebody in front of you and they don't quite connect the dots, and then I love that when I get creative. It's like, how can I get from point A to B? How can I help that person bridge that gap? You know, you come up with an exercise and it works. It's like the best feeling in the world to me.
Well, thanks a lot, Ariane. So where can people find you?
It's arispacblog.com. That's my blog. That's where all the courses and teaching and blogging and all that happens. I'm also on Quora. I answer questions there. I'm also at arianecap.com. That's ARIANECAP, and not as updated as I'd like it, but that's where my gigs are. And if I get to putting them out. And then solobassnight.com. I just want to encourage anybody who's interested in discovering the solo bassist in them to look up that website. And we have a little portal. So if you say, I would like to perform, I'd like to help organize, I live in the city where there's a bunch of other solo bassists, whatever it is, let us know, because we're pretty serious about putting on these shows. And we would like to connect with other people who like solo bass, you know, no matter in what shape or form, looping or just solo or tapping on a 12 string or whatever it is. And so that's a pretty big passion of mine. And then, that's pretty much it.
Brilliant. Ariane, thanks very much.
Hey, Mark, you're super welcome. It's been total pleasure, and I'm glad I met you in London. That was, that was great. We've seen each other in 3D. That's cool.